So, good afternoon and welcome to our SOPHIA studio. And I would like to say we appreciate very much your availability and your willingness to share with us some things, important things that have been discussed during the special session we have been sharing a few minutes ago. I would ask to start like this first with Dr. Ana Colaço from the Azores University to tell us, please, what you have been discussing on the first part of the session, special session on mining. Yeah,
so this session was about deep sea mining, and nowadays we have this project which is called MIDAS, that it's dealing with the potential impacts of the mining, the plumes, the toxicity on different mining types like polymetallic sulfides or nodules or cobalt crusts. This first section, it was about the potential impact of the plumes that can be created during mining, or the watering of the mining that goes back to the bottom of the ocean can have on different type of animals like vent animals or suspension fielder animals that live on seamounts or on inactive areas. We talked about the toxicity aspects and the capacity of the animals to resist that toxicity. There were 4 talks. One of them showed that excess of copper can damage the cells. The other one showed that we cannot use blindly kits available in the market to assess toxicity, because we noticed that the baseline were more toxic than areas that we know that are toxic, so things must be really sought carefully. The other one showed that particles can have damages on soft corals, on gorgonies, but more studies needs to be addressed. And the other one showed that the normal plumes of the hydrothermal vents have specific biodiversity, and also has production of carbon that goes towards the upper layers of the ocean. So we need to study that before start mining the active areas, and probably not do it.
In fact, it is a common spread idea that mining down there is something quite similar. Just pick up the bottom of the sea, scratch the seabed, and you take something out, and that is the same thing overall. But in fact, it is exactly the opposite. There are different techniques for mining. You are searching different things, and you are impacting different ecosystems in different parts of the world. And all of that has to be addressed in a scientific way and in I would say, in a good dialogue with the companies involved in that mining. Otherwise, it could be a fraud, and also it could be a road to disaster. Is that right?
Yes, I think that science, everything needs to be driven by science. So we need to work closely with industry and with companies, but independently, and do the best science possible. Good science can give good advices. So we need to understand first what's there, how it works, how it will, how sensitive they are, if they are able to recover or not, and after that we need to give the best advice as possible.
Okay, and that advice is not just a matter of studying it once in a certain size, in a certain place, and then replicating the formula for every other case, because it's not possible simply.
No, it's not possible. My colleagues that work on the nodule area will show you that the systems are completely different, the technology is the impact, so it's case by case.
Okay. So, Dr. Craig Smith, could you please pick up on this point and tell us what comes next in the meeting?
Well, next we had a session talking about the Central Pacific, the Clipperton-Clarion zone, which is a vast region that's being explored for polymetallic nodules. And what is clear, it's a big area that's poorly studied. There have been a lot of cruises over the years, but very few data available. And our group, actually the rest of the session was from the ABYSSLINE project, which is the abyssal baseline project that we've put together to study baseline conditions in the Clipperton-Clarion zone and the eastern end in particular, where the UK has a claim area. And there I'll talk a little bit about the ecology and quantitative biodiversity, and Adrian will talk about the taxonomy and species distributions. But we're putting together more effort than has been ever focused on one area in this region, and we're finding quite surprising things. For one thing, it turns out to be from the bacteria up to the megafauna, a lot of species richness, a lot of diversity. So that's one somewhat unexpected find. We thought they would be diverse, but they seem to be very diverse, the areas that we're studying. And there also are lots of rare species. There's a long list for example, in the sediment macrofauna in the box scores, we estimate we got 227 species out of 800 individuals, most of them occurring only once or twice.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
It subverts the traditional views that when there are severe conditions, you have populations as big as the carrying capacity of the ecosystem, but very, very few species. Now we are finding something that is really new. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, we've actually known for quite a while that deep sea ecosystems have a high diversity. Yeah. But this is close to the top of the systems we've looked at in terms of diversity, which in these very food-poor systems in the abyssal ocean is somewhat unexpected. And another thing that's really important for understanding or for predicting the impact of mining is that most of the species are very rare. And so it's very difficult to get a good handle on their distributions, on the population connectivity, because it's very hard to collect more than one individual.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I would like to go deeper on one thing I retained from the first part of your intervention. You said that the Clipperton zone, there were many cruises, but little data coming out. And why is that? The data is not coming out from the sea or get lost somewhere within companies, state departments, and so on?
Part of it is that the data have not been made available. They've been collected by contractors, and they're just not being made available to the public. But there's another side of that problem, and I think Adrian would be the appropriate person to comment on that.
So please let them come in.
We're like 18th century scientific explorers working in an environment about which almost nothing is known. I'm a research zoologist. I've studied deep sea polychaetes and other invertebrate species, but now we're being challenged and tasked by society to really try to understand a region about which we almost have no prior information. This is an unexplored sort of wilderness environment where we need to collect fundamental data on the biodiversity so we can make these kind of informed decisions as to whether or not society would accept the idea of mining these environments. There are several different types of mining operation which are currently being planned and explored in the region. As Craig and Anna have alluded to, this could be mining for polymetallic nodules in the Central Pacific or sulfide chimneys associated with vents. In fact, a common thread and theme across all of these environments is our lack of knowledge of really sort of the basic taxonomy, what species live there. There's probably three things that I think that really key society concerns about going into these environments. One is what are the animals that live there? Do we care about them? What role do they play ecologically or functionally? Is it something that would concern us if they were no longer there or their habitat was changed? And where else they live? What's their biogeographic pattern? So if we were going to devise a management plan, which is now currently being worked up in a series of workshops and conferences organised by the International Seabed Authority in Jamaica, what kind of plan would we enact to answer those sorts of environmental management, impact assessment questions? Requires fundamental scientific knowledge. And that's really what we were discussing today, is what kind of knowledge do we have? What are these new cruises and programs and explorations doing now to actually provide that sort of data? It's really quite remarkable. I think in the next few years, the project that Craig's been leading, the ABYSSLINE project, and all of the work at the sulfide chimneys that Anna's alluded to, we had all this amazing studies of the ecotoxicology, that's the tolerances of some of these species to physiological stress. All of these sorts of researches are actually they're fundamental scientific investigations, but they'll have huge relevance as we go about this decision-making process over the next few years.
Yeah. I fully agree with you, and the scientific approach to this issue is really fundamental. But my problem again comes if it is so, why there are information not coming that is relevant from science? We are not making up altogether a risk of touching something that can turn wrong if we cope with.
I think it's a fair question, and I mean I certainly alluded to in my presentation today and others as well, is that there has been quite a number of expeditions to these regions. Key to really understanding the environment is to get biologists out there on these expeditions, undertaking biological research that basically answer fundamental questions which we need. Historically, as Craig alluded to, a lot of the early work in, for example, the Clarion-Clipperton zone has been survey cruises, obviously looking for the geology of the region. It's understandable, they want to know what minerals are there. Key to really increasing the amount of taxonomic and scientific and ecological publications is getting biologists out there collecting the data and making it available. It's time-consuming and it's costly. That's two obvious reasons. But it's clear that if we want to launch a big new industry, we have to find the resources through the contractors, through the regulators, through the governments, wherever it is. And probably all of those organisations will share a responsibility to pay for this in one way or another, so we can make those sorts of informed decisions on how to manage this in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I would dare to say that we must do so. We must find a way to reach there. And what's next for the future, for cooperation among scientists? Is the scientific community working together in these issues, or we have still many small groups working here and there?
It's highly collaborative science, and what you see here at the Deep Sea Biology Symposium in Aveiro is the amount of collaboration and networking and discussion and openness with data. So I think it's a really positive step that industry and regulators are actually really engaging with the academic community. We're academics, we collaborate, we make our data available through publications, and that is really an absolutely vital process here, particularly in the case of the deep sea, where the knowledge, the basic science knowledge is so poor. It's very different if, for example, you're working in perhaps an environmental impact in somewhere where we're quite familiar with the environment and the biology and the systems, and that's where this engagement with the academic community is absolutely fundamental, I think.
Yeah, and one of the keys to the collaboration, and this is part of the reason that we know so little about the fauna, the animals of the Clipperton-Clarion zone, is that most of the species that we're finding there are new to science. They're not described. So there's not a framework that we can say, oh, we got this species with a name over on one part of the Clipperton-Clarion zone, and now someone finds it over here. There's no framework to register, to understand the distribution of organisms. So Adrian's group in particular has been very creative and progressive in developing a new approach using molecular genetics and morphological taxonomy, the shape of the animals, and try to put those together so that rather than waiting maybe decades before all these hundreds of species we're finding are described in a formal way, there can be collaboration and communication between different programs working in the Clipperton-Clarion zone. And so that's been one of the problems in getting the information out, that there are different groups, they go collect a lot of samples, they get hundreds of species that are new to science, but they just have a list of species A, B, C, and D. Another group goes to another part of the area, collects hundreds of species, and then they have another list of species A, B, C, and D, but they're a different order. And there's no way to put these data sets together without something like molecular genetics, DNA barcoding.
You have to build the framework
That's right.
as long as you go. You are
But
needing some systematic.
Yeah, a systematic framework. This is a new kind of systematic framework that Adrian and Thomas Dahlgren
It's not
are doing.
describing species and taxonomy is obviously not a new discipline. It's been around for 300, 400 years. But what we have now is these new tools, and that's online tools, databasing systems, data systems that can talk to each other, and molecular genetics, as Craig was saying, and combining those two with the morphological knowledge and then building into that all of the ecological understanding that we gain from going to these environments, making observations and collecting, numerical and quantitative kinds of data is going to sort of really lead to a revolution. And it's certainly true. Academics, where is the data? People are wondering. But in academia, we are good at getting our data out in accessible formats. It's just that it has to be funded and has to be factored in into these high strategic level management of the region. And I think that's key.
And on that effort, what is the role that should be played by Portuguese scientists involved in deep sea? What you do? What are your ideas on this? We should concentrate in one area. We should concentrate in getting knowledge or methodologies in different zones of the world. What are we missing? People, financing, perspective.
For Portugal?
From a Portuguese contribution to this.
We have been involved as deep sea biologists doing science with our colleagues and cooperating, promoting, learning, sharing experiment experiences, and we are just a few. We need, I think Portugal needs to invest much more on deep sea knowledge acquirement and increasing the capacity of the institutions, other academic or their own institutions in what regards the deep sea. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of knowledge out there, and we are part of that knowledge, so we just have to increase our capacity and do investment and be part of the creation of templates, of methodologies, of that's.
So, in fact, when you mention increasing our capacity, it involves several areas: more people, upgrading knowledge of existing people, more equipment, more integration with other teams working around the world. I guess it's a bit of all of this.
Yeah, and it's actually, I mean, it's true for Portugal, but it's also true. I mean, there's kind of a global need now for more resources and more integration, because we're kind of at an interesting time. The deep sea makes up 99.5% of the biosphere. Most of the volume where animals live where biota live in the world, in the biosphere, in the ocean. And we're actually at a new stage. The deep sea is also probably the least disturbed or least impacted by human activities of any ecosystems on the planet. But we're on the point of moving into the deep sea now. And mining, there's a lot of oil extraction already, so the human footprint in the deep sea is expanding rapidly, and but we still are incredibly ignorant about most of the biodiversity in the deep sea and how it functions and species extinction risk. So there's really a need. I'm a deep sea biologist, so I see this very clearly, but I think it's a need for society to recognize that this is a vast, diverse set of ecosystems that are still quite pristine, but we're on the verge of changing that, and we don't really know how it will be changed. We don't understand the biology of the deep sea well enough, or even the nature of the impacts well enough to make a prediction of what we would lose or not lose from these human activities.
I mean, to illustrate that point, I mean, today we're in a meeting room with 30 or 40 people, biologists, but the challenge that we've been asked is to actually, for example, in my group, is to how many species live in areas of 1,000 kilometres or more by 1,000 kilometres. To give you, compared to Portugal, it's like, say 500 or 600 kilometers in length. We've been challenged with really understanding biodiversity in a region perhaps twice or 3 times the size of an entire country, and we're just a handful of people at this stage. We have to scale up our biological investigations and our knowledge rapidly if we're going to be able to make these sorts of informed decisions.
Yes, because otherwise we should be taken by the reality, and if something turns wrong, they will even ask the scientific community to get with solutions for something they were not able to help develop sustainably in the first time.
And one of the things that we are moving, but slowly, is that people think that deep sea it's an isolated. They don't realize that everything is connected. And from 200 meters down there, all that water masses, all those substrates, all those species, they are all interconnected. And also the shallow waters, they are influenced by what's happening on the deep sea. Portugal talks about upwellings, but the upwellings, it's nutrients that come from the deep sea. They had to be remineralized that. So what we do to the deep sea at some point, sooner or later, will affect also the shallow waters. And we need to pass that message that deep sea, we don't see it, but it's as important as the fishes that we eat or the beaches that we go.
As a society, we have to broaden our view and to understand and to make other people understand that the deep sea is not something that is down there, dark and devoid of life and so.
It's tremendously rich in life, and it's tremendously rich in animals that are bizarre and wonderful in what they look and what they do. And so if we really want to understand and appreciate diversity of life, the deep sea is an absolutely essential set of ecosystems to understand.
Now we know we do not need to go to Mars. We can just go down and find them at below our feet.
Yeah, the life in the deep sea is much more interesting than the life that would be on Mars.
Okay. Thank you very much for your contribute, and all the best for the pursuit of your investigations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.